This is not just a story about a missing girl. It's a story about a mother who never stopped searching, even when the world told her to move on. It's about secrets buried deeper than memory, and a truth so heartbreaking it could only survive in silence. When a woman stumbles upon a photo that shouldn't exist, a cascade of memories, betrayals, and haunting coincidences begins to unravel everything she believed. What if someone you lost was never really gone, just hidden in plain sight? Stay with us, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We want to hear your story too. The rain had just started when Eleanor Hayes stepped out of her aging sedan, the scent of wet pavement rising to greet her like an old friend she never wanted to see again. The sky above her small Iowa town hung heavy with gray clouds, sagging as though the heavens were too burdened to hold themselves up. She clutched her worn beige cardigan tighter around her chest as the wind nipped at her skin. The parking lot outside the local grocery store was nearly empty, but something unusual caught her eye the moment she reached for the door handle. Tucked beneath her windshield wiper, fluttering slightly with the breeze, was a white envelope. It was not soaked yet, but the first few drops of rain had begun to speckle its surface. There was no stamp, no return address, no name. Just her car. Just her. She paused, the hum of old fears returning like a melody she once knew by heart. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she pulled the envelope free and stared at it. The handwriting was neat, unfamiliar, but clearly written with intention. Inside, one single sentence. "You were never meant to forget her." Her breath caught. Her knees buckled slightly as she fell into the driver's seat, her fingers crumpling the edge of the paper as if trying to erase what she had read by force alone. Couldn't be. It had been 28 years. 28 birthdays passed in silence. 28 Christmases with an empty chair. 28 springs where she stood by the cornfield praying the soil would spit the truth out and finally tell her where her daughter went. Her daughter, Lily Hayes, 7 years old, red curls like wildfire in the sun, vanished during the county fair while wearing a red scarf Eleanor had given her that very morning. They had been laughing. Eleanor had looked away for just a second, just 1 second to fix a button on her purse, and when she turned back, Lily was gone. Not a sound, not a scream, nothing. It was as though the earth had opened up and swallowed her whole. And now this letter. Eleanor didn't drive home. Instead, her car veered instinctively to the edge of town, toward a place she had not visited in years. Her childhood home, long abandoned and left to decay on the outskirts, surrounded by silence and overgrown trees. The paint was peeling, the windows clouded with dust and mildew. Yet the door creaked open easily, as though it too had been waiting. She stepped into the dim interior, her shoes echoing softly against the wooden floorboards. The air smelled of mold and old memories. She walked through the hallway slowly, running her fingers along the faded wallpaper, and entered the kitchen. That's when she saw it. On the floor near the old table, half covered in dust, was a child's red scarf. Her heart stopped. She knelt beside it, hands trembling as she reached out. The fabric was frayed at the edges but unmistakable. She had embroidered a small white heart on the inside lining with Lily's initials when she gave it to her. It was still there. LH. Her mouth moved but no sound came. Tears gathered in her eyes, hot and urgent, falling to the floor without resistance. Then the phone rang. Not her cell. Not any phone she had used in decades. The dusty old landline on the wall rang 3 times. She reached for it slowly, dread swimming beneath her skin. "Hello." A pause. Then a woman's voice, raspy and hollow. "You're getting close." The line went dead. Eleanor collapsed into the nearest chair, the scarf still clutched in her hand. That night she didn't sleep. She sat in her car outside the house, staring at the scarf as rain fell around her in steady sheets. At dawn, she drove to Tom's house. Tom Hayes had once been her husband. They had divorced 5 years after Lily's disappearance, the grief too heavy to carry together. He lived alone now in a small house by the lake, fishing more often than not, speaking rarely to anyone. He opened the door slowly, surprised to see her. "Ellie." She didn't waste time. She held out the scarf. His face went white. "I found it," she said softly. "In the kitchen. My mother's old house." He stared at it for a long time, then finally stepped aside and let her in. They sat silently at the kitchen table. Tom poured 2 cups of coffee, his hands shaking. "I got a letter too," he said after a long pause. Eleanor's eyes widened. "Last week," he added. "Same handwriting. It said, 'You looked away first. I thought it was a prank. No one ever found out what really happened,'" she whispered. "No one believed she could just disappear. Except your mother," he said. "She always insisted Lily wasn't dead. She said she felt her, like she was somewhere close but hidden." Eleanor clenched her hands into fists. "She never told me that. She said she didn't want to make it worse." The coffee went cold in their hands. Later that afternoon, Eleanor returned to the cornfield. It had been closed off years ago due to safety concerns, with signs warning of unstable ground and occasional sinkholes. But it wasn't the soil that haunted her. She parked her car by the fence and walked toward the edge of the field. The stalks were low now, it wasn't growing season. The space stretched before her like a ghost of the past. She touched the rusted metal gate. A breeze blew gently, and for a moment, just a moment, she saw her. A little girl, red scarf fluttering, running between the rows of corn, laughing. Then gone. She gasped. Footsteps behind her. She turned. A man stood across the field, partially hidden by an old oak tree. He held something in his hands. It was red. She blinked, and he was gone. Eleanor stumbled backward, breath hitching in her throat. That night, at home, she opened an old toy box she hadn't touched in years. Inside, beneath faded dolls and crumbling crayon drawings, was a folded newspaper clipping. August 1997. Unidentified child found wandering in Illinois cornfield. No memory. Age estimated at 7. Red hair. No one claimed her. Eleanor stared at the grainy black and white photo. The girl's eyes looked familiar, terrifyingly familiar. The phone rang again. This time it was a blocked number. She answered. A whisper. "She's not where you left her." The line clicked. Eleanor dropped the phone. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Inside her heart, the storm had already begun. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of Eleanor's living room, casting long golden lines over the dust-covered furniture. She sat motionless on the couch, the red scarf wrapped around her fingers like a tether to a time she couldn't stop reliving. The newspaper clipping lay open on the coffee table, the grainy image of the unidentified child staring up at her like an echo. There was something about the eyes, the tilt of the brow, the solemn way they met the camera. It wasn't just the resemblance. It was the weight of recognition that settled like a stone in Eleanor's stomach. She knew that expression because it had once belonged to Lily, a child who had stared out the car window with that same silent depth, who had hugged her goodbye with that same quiet intensity that seemed, now in hindsight, too final. Eleanor's mind spun in fragments. The letter, the scarf, the voice on the phone, the girl in the clipping, the man in the cornfield. Each piece floated in her memory like broken glass on water. She had no proof of anything, just feelings, memories, instinct. But she knew with every part of her that someone was trying to tell her something. And for the first time in years, the numbness she had lived with began to crack. Beneath it, something stirred. Fear, yes, but also hope. She stood and began to gather old files from her hallway closet, rummaging through boxes labeled with permanent marker. Lily's room, fair photos, police reports. She opened them one by one, surrounding herself with pieces of a past she had tried to bury. Her fingers brushed across Lily's drawings, a family of stick figures smiling under a yellow sun. A journal Eleanor had once kept, with entries that grew increasingly frantic after Lily's disappearance. She flipped through pages filled with pleas, memories, dead ends. Then, buried beneath a stack of faded photographs, she found a brochure. Harlan County Historical Society, preserving Iowa's past since 1953. She froze. That was the name Meredith had mentioned. Meredith Adams. a woman her mother once worked with years ago who now ran the local archives. Eleanor remembered her faintly. Thin, pale, with a sharp voice and softer eyes. If anyone could help her trace the photograph in the newspaper, or find out who that girl was, it was Meredith. By noon, she was driving toward the town square, the cornfields blurring past the windows like a living memory. When she arrived at the small brick building that housed the Historical Society, it looked just as she remembered, worn but proud, with ivy climbing its sides like old secrets clinging to stone. She pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped into the cool, musty air of the archive room. Meredith looked up from behind the front desk, adjusting her glasses. "Eleanor Hayes," she said slowly, rising to her feet. "It's been a long time." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "Too long." Meredith studied her for a moment before gesturing to a small table. "Sit down. You look like you've seen a ghost." Eleanor didn't smile. "Maybe I have." She slid the clipping across the table. Meredith leaned in, reading silently, her expression tightening. "I remember this," she said finally. "We had a few people asking about her back then, but no one ever claimed her. She was placed into foster care. Then the trail went cold. No official name, just listed as Jane Doe Redhead." She looked up. "Why are you asking about her now?" Eleanor's voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I think she's my daughter." Meredith's eyes widened. "But, Eleanor, Lily disappeared years before this article was published." "I know," Eleanor said, her voice cracking. "But look at her. Look at her eyes." Meredith glanced again, more carefully this time. "It's not impossible," she said cautiously. "Stranger things have happened in this town." She paused. "You remember the others, don't you?" Eleanor frowned. "Others?" Meredith stood and walked to a locked cabinet, retrieving a thin manila folder. "There have been disappearances in this region since the 1950s. All children, all redheads, all around the same time of year." She opened the file and laid out 4 separate newspaper clippings, each nearly identical in tone, each about a missing child. And all of them vanished near that same cornfield. Eleanor's skin prickled. "How is this not common knowledge?" Meredith's face darkened. "Because after the 3rd child vanished, they started burying it. The town didn't want panic or attention. The field was closed off, officially due to unstable land. But unofficially," she shook her head, "people whispered, said the land remembers, that it keeps things, or takes them." Eleanor didn't believe in ghost stories. Not really. But she had seen something out there, something she couldn't explain. She drew in a shaky breath. "Can you find out what happened to that girl? Where she went?" Meredith nodded. "It'll take a few days, but I'll do what I can." Then she hesitated. "Eleanor, be careful. If you stir up old ghosts, they might follow you home." Back at her car, Eleanor sat in silence for a long time, her mind racing. She opened her purse and pulled out the letter again. "You were never meant to forget her." The words hit differently now, as though they weren't just about memory, but about responsibility, about truth. She didn't go home. Instead, she drove back to the cornfield. The wind had picked up, the sky turning a dull steel gray. She walked along the fence, her hand brushing against the cold metal, until she found a narrow opening. An old maintenance gate, rusted but unlocked. Without thinking, she slipped through and stepped into the field. The air changed immediately. It was colder inside, though the sky above remained unchanged. The silence was thick, almost oppressive. She walked slowly, her footsteps crunching over dry leaves. The stalks had been cut recently, leaving short stubs behind, like teeth in the earth. She moved forward until she reached the center of the field, or what felt like the center. Her heart pounded. She knelt, touched the soil. Then a whisper, so faint she thought she imagined it. "Mommy!" Eleanor's breath caught. She looked around. No one. "Mommy!" She stood, spinning in place. "Lily!" Nothing. She turned to leave and stopped. Carved into the nearest tree, just beyond the edge of the clearing, were names. for names. And at the very bottom, freshly scratched beneath the others, was a fifth. Lily Hayes. She stumbled back, a sob choking her throat. Back in her car, her hands trembled as she tried to start the engine. It wouldn't turn over. She slammed her palms against the steering wheel and let out a cry of frustration. That night, she stayed at a motel in town. She couldn't face going home. Her mind raced with memories, fragments, questions that had no answers. At midnight, she finally collapsed onto the bed and dreamed. She was in the field again, but the corn was tall now, towering over her. The sky above was dark, swirling with clouds. She heard laughter, high, sweet, childlike. She followed it, pushing through the stalks until she reached a clearing. Lily stood there, older, maybe 10, wearing the red scarf. She looked up, tears in her eyes. "Why did you leave me?" she asked. Eleanor tried to speak, but no sound came. She reached out, and just as her fingers brushed her daughter's cheek, she woke up, sweating, crying, alone. The scarf lay beside her on the bed, though she was sure she had locked it in the glove box. And in her hand, though she had no memory of picking it up, was a drawing. A child's drawing, of a house with 3 windows, a tall tree in the yard, and 2 figures standing at the door. One labeled Mom, the other, Me. The morning after the dream felt heavier than the last, as if the air around Eleanor had thickened with unspoken truths. She sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the crayon drawing clenched in her hand, its edges damp with sweat and the weight of confusion. The image was simple, childlike, yet it sliced deeper than any photograph could have. That tree, that house, that door. It was her old home, no doubt about it. And the 2 figures, crudely labeled Mom and Me, had a familiarity that unsettled her. She traced her thumb over the words, over the stick-figure child who smiled up at her from the page. It was Lily's handwriting. It had to be, but how could it be? That drawing hadn't existed before. She would have remembered. Eleanor paced the motel room like a trapped bird, her mind spinning with fear and longing. She thought about the dream, about Lily's voice, her face, older, but still hers. Was it possible? Could dreams carry messages? Could memories be more than just electrical echoes in the brain? Or was she falling apart again, like she had after the first year without Lily, when she began seeing her in shop windows and park benches only to realize she was chasing ghosts? The clock ticked past 8 when her phone buzzed on the nightstand, a number she didn't recognize. Her fingers hovered for a second before answering. "Hello?" she whispered. Silence. Then a voice, female, cautious but clear. "Mrs. Hayes? My name is Jane Hollowell. I think I can help you." Eleanor stood straighter, adrenaline prickling her skin. "Help me? I know about the girl in the cornfield," Jane continued. "I know you're looking for her. I've seen her." Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone. "Where?" "Not exactly in the way you'd expect," Jane said gently. "Please, I know how this sounds, but I need you to trust me. Can we meet?" Eleanor hesitated, her heart pounding. She wanted to scream yes, to demand answers, but her years of pain had taught her caution. "How do I know you're not just another person trying to reopen wounds for your own curiosity?" Jane was quiet for a beat. Then, "Because I saw your daughter in my dreams before I ever knew your name. She was wearing a red scarf and calling for you." An hour later, they met at a quiet cafe off the interstate. Jane was in her 30s, with tired eyes that carried the look of someone who'd seen too much and shared too little. Her hands shook slightly as she stirred her tea. "I've had dreams like this since I was a child," she said softly. "But lately, they've become more specific, more urgent, about a little girl in a cornfield, about someone named Lily." Eleanor listened, skeptical but unable to look away. "Why me?" "I didn't know at first," Jane admitted. "But I found your blog, the one you started after Lily disappeared. The photo, the scarf, the way she looked in my dream, it was her. And then..." Jane reached into her bag and pulled out a folded photograph. "This came in the mail 2 days ago. No note, no return address. Eleanor's breath caught as she unfolded it. The image was grainy, taken from a distance. A red-haired woman on a beach, barefoot, holding a red scarf. She was laughing, spinning, alive, older, maybe in her 30s. But there was something hauntingly familiar in her posture, in the way she held the scarf close to her chest. "Where was this taken?" Eleanor asked, her voice shaking. "I think in California," Jane said. "Somewhere along the coast. I did a reverse image search, couldn't find it anywhere online. Whoever sent it wanted you to see it. I think that's her. Your daughter." The weight of hope nearly knocked Eleanor to the floor. She leaned back in her chair, heart racing. Could it really be Lily? Could she be alive somewhere? Not just surviving, but living, smiling, dancing, laughing? Jane leaned forward. "There's more. The dreams, they always end the same way." She walks into the cornfield and disappears. But then I hear a voice. A woman's voice. "You gave her to the wrong world." Eleanor's eyes snapped to hers. "What does that mean?" Jane shook her head. "I don't know, but I think something happened that day. Something more than just a disappearance. Something bigger." Eleanor felt her hands begin to tremble. "I saw her in the field, Jane. Just yesterday. She was there. For a second. A vision maybe, but it felt real. And then I found her name carved into a tree." Jane nodded slowly, as though she'd expected that. Places remember. That field especially. It doesn't forget. And neither does she. They sat in silence for a moment, both overwhelmed by the gravity of what they were piecing together. Then Eleanor spoke again. "There's someone I need to talk to. My ex-husband. He said he got a letter too. And he's hiding something. I can feel it." Jane nodded. "I'll come with you." That afternoon, they drove to Tom's house by the lake. The wind had picked up, and the water outside slapped gently against the shore. Tom answered the door with a frown, his expression wary as he saw Jane. Eleanor wasted no time. "Tom, this is Jane. She's seen Lily in dreams, in visions. She got a photo." Tom exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. "Ellie, I don't know how much more of this I can." "Tell me what you saw," Eleanor interrupted. "Not what you told the police. What you really saw the day she vanished." Tom hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." They sat at the kitchen table, the same place they had once shared countless breakfasts and quiet evenings when Lily was small. Tom ran a hand through his graying hair. "I never told you because I didn't want to believe it myself," he said. "But the morning before the fair, I found Lily sitting outside, staring at the cornfield. She wasn't moving, just watching, like she was listening to something. I asked her what she was doing, and she said, 'They're calling me.'" Eleanor blinked. "Who's they?" Tom shook his head. "I thought it was just a child's imagination. But later, after she disappeared, I remembered, and I hated myself for not pressing her, for not keeping her closer." He got up, walked to a small cabinet, and pulled out an old envelope. "This came last week. I didn't show you because I didn't want to drag you into false hope." Eleanor opened it. Inside was a photo, the same photo Jane had shown her. Only this time, there was a note scribbled on the back. "Truth lives where she forgot to look." She turned it over again, studying the woman. Could it really be Lily? What kind of world had taken her and made her forget? That night, Eleanor dreamt again. She stood in her old backyard, the sun setting in hues of orange and gold. Lily was there, younger this time, maybe 9 or 10. Her hair braided, her dress the same as the one she'd worn to the fair. She was drawing in the dirt with a stick, humming the lullaby Eleanor used to sing at bedtime. Eleanor knelt beside her. "Lily." The girl looked up, eyes wide and knowing. "You stopped looking in the right places," she whispered. "But I left clues. You just weren't ready to see them." Eleanor reached for her, but the dream dissolved into blackness. She woke up gasping, her cheeks wet with tears. On the nightstand, a small object glinted under the lamp. It was Lily's bracelet, the one she'd worn on the day she vanished. The bracelet shimmered under the pale glow of the motel lamp, as if lit from within. Eleanor stared at it without blinking, her breath shallow, afraid that if she moved, it might disappear like everything else had. The tiny silver charm shaped like a star still hung from the clasp, Lily's favorite symbol since she was old enough to draw. "I want to be a star when I grow up," she used to say. "Not like the ones on TV, the ones in the sky that never go away." Eleanor's hands trembled as she reached out to touch it. The moment her skin met the cool metal, a shock of memory surged through her like electricity. Lily's laughter in the backyard, the way her small hand fit perfectly inside hers, the way she used to run down the hallway in fuzzy socks, her hair bouncing with every step, the smell of cinnamon shampoo, the way she used to hide in the linen closet to surprise her parents. It all came crashing down, and with it, a wave of grief so powerful Eleanor fell to her knees, clutching the bracelet to her chest as though it were the only real thing left in the world. When she managed to pull herself together, it was nearly 6 a.m. The sky was still a heavy blue, the world not quite awake, but Eleanor felt the pull of the field calling her again. Not just for answers, but for something more, something she couldn't name yet. She called Jane, who answered on the second ring, her voice groggy but alert. "I found her bracelet," Eleanor said softly. "It was on the nightstand when I woke up. I didn't bring it with me. I didn't have it." Jane was quiet for a moment, then said, "She's trying to reach you." "Do you really believe that?" Eleanor asked. "I don't know what I believe," Jane replied, "but something is happening, and it's not random." They agreed to meet at the cornfield at sunrise. The wind was still, almost unnaturally so, when Eleanor arrived. The sky bled into soft pinks and grays as dawn broke over the horizon. Jane stood near the edge of the field, arms crossed, her face pale. "I brought something too," she said, pulling out a faded book. "My grandmother's dream journal. She used to write down every vision she had. I didn't even know this existed until last night. Look at this entry from 1963. Eleanor read the page aloud. "A girl in red, hair like fire. She walks into the corn and never comes out. But the field keeps her, not to harm her, to hide her, until the world is ready again." The two women stood in silence, the words settling between them like dust on forgotten shelves. Eleanor took a step forward. "I need to go back in." Jane grabbed her arm. "Wait, if what we're dealing with is bigger than we understand, we need something to anchor you. Something that belongs to Lily." Eleanor pulled the bracelet from her pocket and slipped it onto her wrist. With a deep breath, she stepped beyond the rusted gate, the creaking metal sounding like a warning. The cornfield, though mostly barren now, still carried a strange weight, as if the soil beneath remembered every footstep, every scream, every silence. Eleanor walked until she reached the center, the place where she had seen Lily's name carved into the tree. It was still there, but now, beneath it, a new word had appeared. "Remember." Her heart slammed against her ribs. She knelt beside the tree and placed her palm flat against the bark. The moment she did, the world around her changed. The light shifted, the air grew colder, and then, without warning, the field bloomed to life. Corn rose around her, tall and golden. The sky above turned brilliant blue, and in the distance, she heard music. Carnival music. She turned, heart pounding, and saw the county fair, exactly as it had been 28 years ago. Children laughing, cotton candy in the air, and there, just beyond the carousel, Lily, 7 years old, red scarf fluttering. Eleanor called out, but her voice didn't carry. She ran forward, pushing through the stalks, and with every step, the scene shifted, warped, like a memory on fast forward. Lily aged in seconds 9, 11, 13. The fair dissolved. The corn grew taller. The world darkened. And then Eleanor stood in a field at night. A single light glowed ahead. She walked toward it and found a small cabin. Inside, a woman sat at a table, back turned, humming softly. Eleanor stepped closer. "Lily." The woman turned. It was her, grown, beautiful, older, and wearing the scarf. Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. "Lily, is it really you?" The woman stood slowly, her expression unreadable. "I don't know who you are," she said softly, "but I remember your voice." Eleanor took a trembling step forward. "You're my daughter. You're Lily Hayes. I've been looking for you for 28 years. The woman touched the scarf gently. "I've seen this in my dreams. I always thought it was a gift. I didn't know it was a memory." Eleanor's knees gave out and she collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. "They told me you were gone, that you disappeared. But I knew. I always knew." The woman knelt beside her. "I've lived so many lives," she whispered. "None of them felt like mine, until now. Then, everything faded. The cabin, the light, the field." Eleanor woke up in the grass, the morning sun above her. Jane was beside her, shaking her gently. "You passed out. You were gone for almost an hour. Are you okay?" Eleanor sat up slowly. Her hands were empty. The bracelet was gone. But on her wrist, a small piece of red thread remained. Back at the motel, Eleanor paced the room while Jane made tea. "She's alive," Eleanor said. "I saw her, older. She doesn't remember who she is, but she remembers me, somewhere deep down." Jane nodded. "There's a woman I know in California. She works with regression therapy. If that photo came from there, maybe we can find her." Eleanor looked out the window. "I'm going." Jane turned. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Eleanor said. "If Lily is alive, I will find her. And I will bring her home." As she packed her suitcase that night, she found another drawing slipped between the pages of her journal. This time it was a beach, a woman in a white dress, an older man standing beside her, and in the corner, a small girl watching them from a distance, alone. The road to California stretched endlessly before her, a long ribbon of cracked asphalt flanked by fields, mountains, and the occasional forgotten town. Eleanor drove with both hands tightly on the wheel, her eyes locked forward as if afraid that if she looked away for even a moment, everything would disappear again. The last 48 hours had unraveled everything she thought she understood about her life, her grief, her past. Lily was alive. Not just alive, real, tangible, a grown woman with pieces of memory buried so deep she didn't even know they were hers. And now, Eleanor was chasing the fragments of that truth across the country, following a photo and a dream and the desperate certainty in her chest that this wasn't over, that it couldn't be. Jane had given her the name of the woman in California, Dr. Harper Lynn, a regression therapist who specialized in memory work for trauma survivors. According to Jane, she wasn't just good. She was transformative. "If Lily is buried under years of forgetting," Jane had said, "this woman might be able to help her remember who she is, who you are." Eleanor had nodded, heart full of hope and dread, and left before dawn. Now, after 3 days on the road, she reached the seaside town of Marigold Bay just as the sun began to set, turning the ocean gold and the sky into a canvas of purples and oranges. It was smaller than she expected, quaint, peaceful, like the kind of place someone might come to disappear, to start over, to pretend they had never been anyone else. She pulled into a small inn overlooking the water and checked in with trembling fingers. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed, the ocean breeze drifting through the open window, and studied the photograph again. The woman in white, the red scarf, the older man beside her, the distant figure of a little girl watching. The details burned into her eyes as she tried to imagine what kind of life Lily had lived here, who had raised her, why no one had ever come forward, why she hadn't remembered. Or maybe, Eleanor thought as tears welled in her eyes, maybe she had remembered and chosen not to come back. The thought made her chest ache. She slept fitfully, haunted by dreams of cornfields and crashing waves, of Lily standing on the beach whispering words Eleanor couldn't hear. In the morning, she met Dr. Harper Lynn at a modest office above a bookstore. The woman was in her late 40s, with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a low braid and eyes that held centuries of stories. She listened carefully as Eleanor explained everything. The disappearance, the dreams, the visions, the scarf, the photo. Harper didn't interrupt once. When Eleanor finally paused to breathe, Harper said softly. I've heard many strange stories in my line of work, but none that feel quite like this. Do you believe me? Eleanor asked. I believe in the power of the mind, Harper replied. And I believe memory is more fluid than we understand. If she's here, and if she's willing, we might be able to bring something back. Harper stood and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a folder. There's someone I've been working with for the past few years. She came to me with amnesia, found wandering the coastline. No ID, no past, just a red scarf in her hands. Eleanor's heart stopped. Harper handed her the file. She goes by Rose. Rose. Eleanor opened the file slowly. The photo inside was clearer than the others. It was her. Her eyes. Her mouth. But different. Changed by time. She wasn't a child anymore. She was a woman. A woman shaped by loss she couldn't name. I need to see her, Eleanor said. Please. Harper hesitated. She's getting married tomorrow. To the man who found her. He's significantly older. He took her in when she was found. Some people think it's strange. But he's been kind. Patient. She's safe. Eleanor felt her stomach twist. She doesn't remember me? She remembers. Feelings. Echoes. She's dreamed of a woman with your face. But she doesn't know who you are. I have to talk to her. Harper nodded. Let me speak to her first. She trusts me. If we push too hard, it might scare her. That night, Eleanor walked the beach, the cold sand under her feet grounding her in the moment. The waves crashed rhythmically beside her, but all she could hear was the laughter of a child echoing in the distance. She sat on a bench and clutched the red thread still tied to her wrist, the last piece of the bracelet she'd found. She closed her eyes and whispered, Please, Lily, remember me. The next day, Harper called. She's agreed to meet at the beach, but she doesn't know who you are. I told her you were someone from her past who might help her understand her dreams. Eleanor's chest ached with the pressure of everything unsaid. She dressed carefully, pulling a soft blue sweater over her blouse, and wrapped the red scarf around her neck. Lily's scarf. She walked to the meeting point slowly, heart pounding, hands shaking. And then she saw her. Rose stood at the water's edge, barefoot, the breeze catching her red curls. She turned slowly as Eleanor approached, her eyes wide and uncertain. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Rose said, I've seen you before, in my dreams. Eleanor nodded, tears burning her eyes. I'm Eleanor. Rose tilted her head. That name, it feels heavy, like I've carried it before. I used to sing to you, Eleanor whispered. You used to fall asleep in my lap. You had a stuffed rabbit named Oliver. You hated peas. You loved puzzles. Rose blinked, her expression faltering. Why does that sound like me? Because it is you, Eleanor said, her voice breaking. You're my daughter. Rose stepped back, shaking her head. No, that's not possible. My life started here, on this beach. I thought I lost you, Eleanor said, but I never stopped looking, never stopped hoping. Rose stared at her for a long time, tears gathering in her eyes. I don't know what's real. My memories, they're fragments, feelings. I remember a scarf, a voice calling my name, but I don't know if it's yours. Let me help you remember, Eleanor said. Please, we don't have to rush. Just talk. Just be near each other. Maybe something will come back. Rose nodded slowly, her voice barely audible. Okay. They sat on the sand for hours, watching the waves, talking softly. Eleanor shared stories. Rose listened. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she laughed at things she didn't remember but felt like she should. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the shore, Rose whispered, Do you think I left on purpose? Eleanor's heart cracked open. I don't know, but if you did, you had a reason, and it wasn't your fault. Rose turned to her. He's not who I think he is he? Eleanor hesitated. I don't know, but I do know he kept you from me, whether he meant to or not. Rose looked out at the water. I need time, but can we meet again tomorrow? Eleanor nodded. As many tomorrows as you need. That night, she returned to the inn and found another drawing slipped under her door. It was of two women standing side by side, both holding the same scarf. And beneath them, written in careful child's handwriting, "Together again." Eleanor awoke before sunrise, the room still shrouded in quiet shadows and the soft whisper of ocean wind threading through the slightly opened window. The drawing lay on the nightstand beside her, its presence both comforting and eerie, as if the child that once was Lily had somehow slipped through time to leave her mother breadcrumbs. She sat up slowly, brushing her fingers over the paper, her heart aching with questions that had no shape yet, only weight. The two women in the drawing held the same red scarf, and though their faces were simple and without features, Eleanor knew they were meant to be her and Lily. Together again. The words haunted her with hope. She didn't eat breakfast. She didn't need coffee. All she needed was to see Rose again, to look into her eyes and find the little girl she had once held, once kissed goodnight, once lost to silence. The beach was nearly empty when she arrived, just a few gulls circling overhead and the rhythm of waves brushing against the shore like an old hymn. Eleanor stood with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her cardigan fluttering in the breeze, the red scarf tied carefully around her neck. She waited, and then she saw her. Rose walked slowly from the boardwalk, barefoot again, a light dress billowing around her calves. Her hair was tied back today, revealing a small scar just beneath her left ear. Eleanor's breath hitched. Lily had fallen from her bike when she was 6 and needed 3 stitches in that exact spot. She hadn't remembered it yesterday, but Eleanor had. "Hi," Rose said quietly, approaching. "Hi," Eleanor replied, trying to keep her voice steady. They sat on the same bench they had used the day before, the ocean stretching out before them like an open secret. "I didn't sleep much," Rose said after a long pause. "Everything feels different now, like my whole life was stretched over someone else's story." "You're not alone," Eleanor said. "I've been living someone else's life too, the one without you in it." Rose looked at her, and there was something softer in her eyes. "Tell me something only my mother would know." Eleanor smiled sadly. "You used to ask me to make your sandwiches into heart shapes, and when I forgot, you'd cry like I'd broken the world." Rose stared at her, lips parting, but she didn't speak. "You had a stuffed rabbit named Oliver," Eleanor continued. "You couldn't sleep without him. One night we lost him at the laundromat and you stayed awake crying until your dad drove back and found him in the dryer." Rose blinked rapidly, her breathing shallow. "I dreamt about that. A rabbit. I didn't know why it mattered so much." "It mattered because it was yours," Eleanor whispered. "Your memories may be buried, but they're still there." "I'm afraid," Rose admitted. "What if I find out things I don't want to know? What if I wasn't happy? What if I ran away on purpose?" Eleanor reached out and gently took her hand. "Then we'll face it together." They sat in silence for a while, the ocean murmuring around them. "I talked to my fiancé last night," Rose said finally. "I told him I was confused, that someone from my past had come back." Eleanor's heart clenched. "What did he say?" "He said the past doesn't matter, that he's the one who saved me, that I owe him my life." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "You don't owe anyone your life, Rose. Especially not someone who claims to love you but doesn't want you to know who you are." "I know," Rose whispered, "but I'm scared. He's been the only constant I've had." "That doesn't make it right," Eleanor said. "It makes it complicated. And that's okay. We can take this slow. You don't have to choose today. Just keep remembering." Rose nodded, her eyes glossy. "I want to remember everything." Eleanor pulled a small box from her bag and handed it to her. "This belonged to you. I kept it all these years." Rose opened the box slowly. Inside was a necklace, tiny silver stars on a thin chain. "You said you wanted to be a star," Eleanor said. "Not like the ones on TV, the ones that never go away." Rose traced the charm with her thumb. "I said that all the time." She slipped the necklace over her head, and for a moment her shoulders seemed lighter. That afternoon they met with Harper Lynn again. In the soft, candlelit office above the bookstore. Harper led Rose into a gentle meditation. Eleanor sat quietly in the corner, watching as her daughter's body relaxed into the couch, her breathing slowing. Harper's voice was calm and measured. "We're going to walk down a hallway," she said. "Each door will take you to a memory. You don't have to open them all, just the ones that call to you." Rose nodded slightly, her face serene. "Tell me what you see," Harper encouraged. "A field," Rose whispered. "Tall corn. The wind is loud. I'm holding someone's hand. It's warm. Safe. Can you see their face?" "No, but I feel happy." "Go further," Harper said. "Open the next door." Rose tensed. "There's a storm. I'm running. I dropped my scarf. I hear my name. Someone's yelling. But then everything goes quiet." Harper's voice was gentler now. "Where do you go?" "I don't know," Rose murmured. "It's like I stepped through something, like the air folded around me, and then nothing, just water. And a man's voice. He tells me I'm safe. He gives me a name." "What name?" "Rose," she said. Eleanor covered her mouth to stop the sob from escaping. Harper guided Rose back slowly. When she opened her eyes, she was crying. "I didn't forget," she whispered. "I was made to forget." Eleanor moved to her side and wrapped her arms around her. "It's okay," she said through tears. "I've got you now." That night, back at the inn, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She stepped onto the balcony and looked at the ocean, her thoughts unraveling. Rose was remembering. Not everything, not yet, but enough. She felt something in her pocket, a small slip of paper. She hadn't put it there. It was a drawing, this time of the cornfield, and a door, with the word, "Return." The morning air was colder than usual, a crispness that carried a strange electricity Eleanor hadn't felt in years. She stood at the edge of the inn's balcony, staring out over the Pacific, the waves glittering like scattered coins under the early sun. The drawing from the night before sat in her hand, creased at the edges but still clear. A field, a door, and the word "return" written in the familiar crooked print of a child. There was no denying it anymore. These drawings weren't figments or coincidences. They were messages, and whoever or whatever was sending them knew Eleanor was finally close. So close, in fact, that she could feel it in her bones, in the very air around her. Lily was no longer just a memory. She was a heartbeat away from returning fully to the life she had lost. Eleanor paced the room, her suitcase already half-packed. She had made her decision before the sun had even risen. She was going back to Iowa, back to the field, back to where it all began. But this time she wasn't going alone. Rose sat quietly in the corner of the room, legs pulled up onto the chair, the red scarf wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her eyes were distant, but her voice was clear when she finally spoke. "You really think going back there will help?" Eleanor looked at her daughter, no longer the little girl she remembered, but a woman caught between two versions of herself. "I think that place holds more answers than either of us are ready for. But yes, I think we need to go." Rose nodded slowly. "I keep seeing the field in my sleep. The wind, the tall stalks, the way it swallowed sound. There's something there, something I left behind." "You didn't leave it," Eleanor said softly. "It was taken from you." They drove in silence for a while, the miles stretching out between them and the ocean like a river of time. Every gas station stop, every quiet stretch of highway, every rest area where Eleanor watched Rose stare out at the horizon. It all felt like a countdown, like the world was holding its breath. By the time they reached Iowa, the sun had fallen low in the sky again, painting the fields in shades of rust and gold. The air was heavier here, thicker with history and silence. Eleanor's childhood home still stood in its quiet corner, untouched since the last time she visited. The windows clouded with dust, the garden overgrown. They didn't go inside. There was no need. The field was calling. The corn had been recently harvested, leaving only stubble and dry dirt behind. The gate stood where it always had, rusted and barely hanging from its hinges. Rose stepped out of the car slowly, her eyes locked on the horizon. "I used to dream about this place," she whispered. Before I even knew it was real. I thought it was just my imagination. It was your memory, Eleanor said. Together, they crossed the threshold into the field. The wind stirred as they walked, soft at first, then stronger, as if the land itself was reacting to their presence. Birds scattered in the distance. The air grew colder. Rose stopped suddenly. Do you hear that? Eleanor paused. What? A song, she said. Someone's humming. Eleanor listened. There, on the edge of perception, was a melody, faint, haunting, familiar. Rose turned in a slow circle, her eyes scanning the ground. This is where I stood, she said. I remember the grass, the sky. I was holding the scarf. And then, she stopped, her body stiffening. There was a man. Eleanor's heart stuttered. What man? I don't know, Rose whispered. I never saw his face, but he said something. He said, "Come with me and forget." Eleanor stepped closer, her hands trembling. And you did, Rose nodded. I think I did. I think I chose to forget. Eleanor felt her knees weaken. Why? Tears filled Rose's eyes. Because I was scared. Because I thought I had done something wrong. I dropped the scarf. I couldn't find you. I thought you left me. Eleanor gathered her daughter into her arms. I never left you. Not for a second. The wind howled suddenly, and the ground beneath them trembled. Rose looked down. The door, she whispered. It's here. Eleanor followed her gaze. A section of the earth was marked differently, darker soil, arranged in a perfect rectangle. Rose knelt beside it and placed her hand on the ground. A flash of light, a memory. She was 7 again, running through the corn. The sky above was turning violet. She was laughing, scarf in hand. Then the laughter stopped. A whisper in the wind. A pull, not physical but internal, like her soul was being tugged in a different direction. She turned, and there he was, a figure made of shadow and voice. Come with me and forget. She looked down at her scarf, then up at the field. She wanted to find her mother, but the fear was bigger. And then nothing. The memory vanished. Back in the present, Rose opened her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. He didn't take me. I went. Eleanor knelt beside her. You were a child. You didn't understand. Rose nodded, her voice broken. But he made me forget you. He promised I'd never feel scared again. I didn't know it meant forgetting love too. They sat there, in the center of the field, as the wind circled them, as the ground began to hum beneath their feet. And then, a voice. Not loud, not harsh, just a whisper. You've returned. Eleanor looked up. The field around them shimmered, as if covered in heat. And then she saw them. Children. Faint, translucent, red-haired. Watching. Lily. The others. The lost. They're echoes, Rose said. Not trapped. Just waiting. For what? Eleanor asked. For someone to remember them. Rose stood and stepped into the center of the marked soil. She took off the scarf and laid it gently on the ground. I remember, she said. I remember my name. I remember who I am. And I remember my mother. The wind stilled. The humming stopped. The door disappeared. And so did the children. The field fell silent again. Rose turned to Eleanor. It's over. Eleanor embraced her, both of them crying, overwhelmed by the weight of everything lost and found. That night, back at the motel, Eleanor found one final drawing. It was of the field, empty, peaceful, and in the center, 2 women walking away hand in hand. The morning sun rose slowly over the Iowa plains, casting a golden hue across the quiet town, as if trying to cleanse the weight of history buried beneath its soil. Eleanor sat by the window of the motel room, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Outside, the wind rustled through the bare trees, the field beyond barely visible from her vantage point. It was hard to believe they had stood in the middle of that field just hours earlier, confronting shadows from the past, unlocking pieces of memory that had been sealed for nearly 3 decades. It felt like waking up in a different world, one where ghosts had names, where silence had voices, and where long-lost daughters remembered their mothers not in dreams, but in daylight. Behind her, Rose was asleep on the bed, curled beneath a quilt Eleanor had found tucked in the closet the night before. Her face was peaceful, soft in sleep, but there was a tension in her brow that hadn't been there yesterday. Healing wasn't linear. Memory didn't return in a clean, coherent line. Came in fragments, whispers, and sometimes painful waves. Eleanor sipped her tea and thought about everything they'd learned. The truth was more tangled than she had imagined. Rose hadn't simply vanished. She had been pulled. Not by force, not physically, but emotionally. Manipulated in a moment of fear and confusion. Enticed by a promise of safety and forgetfulness. And that entity, whatever or whoever it was, that voice that had told her to forget, it wasn't gone. Not entirely. Something still lingered. Something unfinished. The more Eleanor thought about it, the more she felt it. A quiet knowing that the story wasn't over. They had closed a chapter, yes. They had reclaimed something lost. But there was another layer beneath it. One that hadn't yet been touched. A soft knock pulled her from her thoughts. She rose cautiously and opened the door to find Jane standing in the hallway, wrapped in a heavy coat, her expression unreadable. Eleanor let her in without a word, and they sat across from each other, the silence between them stretching long and dense. "I had a dream," Jane finally said. "Last night, after you went back into the field." Eleanor waited. "There was a man," Jane continued. "He wasn't clear, like smoke, but he was standing in front of a mirror, whispering. He said, 'One remembered, but the other remains hidden.'" Eleanor blinked. "What does that mean?" "I don't know," Jane said softly, "but there was another child, a girl. She looked like Lily, but younger, hiding behind the mirror." Eleanor's blood went cold. "I think," Jane said, voice trembling, "I think Lily wasn't the only one." The words settled like a stone in Eleanor's chest. Could it be possible? Was there another piece of the past she had overlooked? She thought about the early days after Lily disappeared, about the conversations she'd had with her own mother, the strange pauses, the withheld details. The way her mother had once said, "Some things are better left in the ground." After Eleanor brought up the idea of expanding the search beyond the county, Rose stirred in the bed, eyes fluttering open. She sat up slowly, rubbing her temples. "I had another dream," she murmured. Eleanor and Jane turned toward her. "There was a house," Rose continued. "Not ours. Bigger. Empty rooms. I was walking down a hallway and I heard crying. I opened a door and there was a little girl inside. She looked at me and said, 'Why did you forget me too?'" Eleanor's breath caught. "Rose, are you sure?" She nodded. "I don't know who she was, but she was sad. And angry." Jane leaned forward. "That's the girl from my dream. I'm sure of it." The room fell into a heavy silence. "What if," Eleanor whispered, "what if there was another child? One we didn't know about?" Jane frowned. "Like a sister?" Eleanor stood slowly, memories unraveling inside her. "I was pregnant once before Lily. I lost the baby. At least, that's what I was told." Jane's eyes widened. "My mother was the one who took me to the hospital. She told me it was a miscarriage. I was 17. My father had just died. Everything was chaotic. I never saw any paperwork. I just believed her." Rose stood now too, her face pale. "Are you saying I might have a sister?" "I don't know," Eleanor said, "but I need to find out." They spent the rest of the morning digging through old documents, hospital records, files Eleanor had buried deep in storage bins. Jane helped call local agencies, archives, even the now-retired doctor's office Eleanor had once visited. Piece by piece, a timeline began to form. There had been a birth, a full-term birth, a baby girl, no death certificate, no burial, just a quiet disappearance from records. And then one final clue, a photo, found in Eleanor's mother's belongings. A black and white image of two babies, maybe a few weeks old, lying side by side. One labeled L, the other A. Rose stared at it in silence, tears slipping down her cheeks. I always felt like something was missing, she whispered. Like there was a part of me that was alone, even when I wasn't. Eleanor sat down heavily. Her name was Abigail, she said. I used to dream about having twin girls. I didn't know it was real. Jane turned to her. Then we need to find her. But how? Rose asked. Where do we even start? Jane looked down at the newest drawing they had found that morning. Another slipped under Eleanor's door. This one showed two mirrors facing each other, and in the space between them, a girl holding a rabbit. The wind had picked up by the time they drove out of town. The cornfields swaying like waves beneath a sky darkened by clouds that threatened rain but refused to fall. Eleanor kept her hands tightly gripped on the steering wheel, her mind reeling with every mile that passed. In the passenger seat, Rose sat in a daze, her fingers absent-mindedly brushing the silver star necklace she hadn't removed since Eleanor gave it back to her. In the back seat, Jane scrolled through documents and old medical records on her tablet, silently tracking every lead they'd uncovered over the past 24 hours. The photo of the two babies, Lily and the mystery twin, had changed everything. The discovery that Eleanor had given birth to twins and had only been told about one child was not just heartbreaking. It was unfathomable. Eleanor's mother was gone now, past years ago, taking with her whatever reasons or rationalizations she may have had for keeping a second child hidden. But something deeper was surfacing, something older than secrets and more powerful than silence. A pull, a sense that Abigail, if that was her name, wasn't just forgotten. She was waiting. They drove for hours before reaching the outskirts of Millersgrove, a quiet town that lay just over the border, where records had shown a private home for children operated from the late 1980s until it was shut down for administrative inconsistencies. The more they dug, the more inconsistencies they found. Children who came and went without legal trace, families who adopted without following state processes, caseworkers whose credentials vanished in audits. And nestled inside those files, just 2 pages before the home's closure, a single-line item had caught Jane's eye. Infant A. No birth certificate. No last name. Fostered at 3 weeks old. Disappeared from files 18 months later. No closure. No notation. Just absence. The house where the children's home once operated was still standing, though now it had been sold to private owners who, according to the local phone book, lived out of state. They parked along the tree-lined street as dusk began to settle, the house looming ahead like a memory trying not to be remembered. Peeling white paint, a sagging porch, broken window on the second floor. It didn't look like a place where children once lived. It looked like a place where they were forgotten. Eleanor approached the front door, her steps heavy with hesitation. Rose and Jane followed close behind. The door creaked open before they knocked. No one was there. Eleanor stepped inside first. The air was thick, stale, tinged with dust and something older, like mildew and lost time. The floors groaned beneath them as they walked through the entryway, into a wide open room with remnants of a child's mural on one wall. Faded stars, stick figure people, and the ghost of a rainbow. This place feels wrong, Rose said quietly. Jane nodded, like it's holding its breath. They moved cautiously through the house, room by room. Most were empty. Some still held furniture draped in old sheets. But it was upstairs, in a room at the end of the hall, that Eleanor stopped. She didn't know why. She didn't have a reason, only a feeling. She turned the handle and stepped inside. The room was small, with slanted ceilings and a narrow window covered by torn blinds. In the center of the room was a mirror, tall and oval, framed in dark wood. It stood on its own. No furniture, no dust, just the mirror. And in it, Eleanor saw herself. But she wasn't alone. Behind her reflection stood a girl. Small, red hair, holding a rabbit. Eleanor spun around. Nothing. She turned back to the mirror. The girl was still there. Tears flooded her eyes. "Abigail," she whispered. Rose stepped into the room. Her face went pale. "I see her too." Jane followed. "So do I." They stared into the mirror. The girl tilted her head. She wasn't a ghost, not exactly. She was clearer than that, realer than a dream, less solid than a memory. Then she spoke. "You forgot me." Eleanor fell to her knees. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know. The girl held the rabbit tighter. They said you didn't want me. They said I was broken. No, Eleanor wept. You were mine. You are mine. Rose knelt beside her. I had dreams about you. I didn't know they were real. I thought I was imagining you. You called me once, the girl said. I heard you. Jane stepped forward. How do we bring her back? The girl's eyes flickered. You don't. I never left. The mirror began to glow softly. I'm in all of you. I'm the part you buried to survive. I'm the silence you learned to live with. But I never stopped waiting. Eleanor reached out. Her fingers touched the glass. It was warm. I love you, she said. I have always loved you. The girl smiled, and then she was gone. The mirror dimmed, but something changed. Rose turned to Eleanor, her eyes wide. I remember her. Jane nodded slowly. Me too. Eleanor stood, trembling. Then she's not gone. She's with us. They left the house in silence. Back in the car, Eleanor opened her bag to put away her notes and found one last drawing. This one was different. It showed 3 women. One with a scarf, one with a necklace, one with a rabbit, standing beneath a sky full of stars. The road back to the coast was silent. The only sound inside the car, the low hum of the tires rolling over endless stretches of highway. Eleanor stared out the window, the weight of the last few days pressing down on her chest like a stone that would never fully lift. Her daughters were alive in ways she hadn't expected. Rose, here and breathing beside her, carrying her past like a fragile mirror she had only recently dared to look into. And Abigail, whose existence had been erased before it could be remembered, still lived within their shared grief, their dreams, their drawings. Somewhere along the miles between Iowa and California, Eleanor began to realize that what they had discovered wasn't a mystery with a simple answer. It was a wound stitched closed by silence, by fear, by choices that weren't hers to make and truths that had been hidden in the name of protection. Now they were driving toward the last known place of Rose's constructed life. The beachside cottage where she had been living with the man who had raised her, loved her, and, intentionally or not, kept her from her past. They arrived in Marigold Bay just after sunset. The sky bled red and gold across the horizon, and the waves crashed against the shore like they were trying to speak. Rose sat quietly beside her, her hands folded in her lap, the silver star necklace still around her neck. I told him I'd marry him, she said softly. He saved me. That's what he always said. That he pulled me out of the water and gave me a name when no one else would. But I think he gave me a story to replace the one I lost. Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. They parked near the chapel where the wedding was set to take place. It was quiet, empty, not a single guest, not a single car. Inside, the lights were on, casting warm yellow through the stained glass. Rose stepped out of the car, her scarf wrapped tight around her shoulders. Eleanor followed slowly. They walked into the chapel together. He was there, Daniel, seated at the front pew, looking older than Eleanor remembered from the photo. His skin pale, his hands folded tightly over a worn handkerchief. When he turned and saw Rose, he stood. You came, he said, his voice trembling. Rose nodded. I came to say goodbye. He blinked. What do you mean? She stepped forward, steady now, sure in a way she hadn't been when they first met. I know who I am. He looked confused. You're Rose. You're mine. She shook her head gently. I'm Lily Hayes. My mother is Eleanor. And I have a sister named Abigail. His face twisted. No, that's not right. I saved you. I raised you. Without me, you would have drowned. You had nothing. I had everything, she said softly. And someone took it from me. Eleanor moved closer. Did you know? Daniel's face fell, his eyes darting between them. I didn't mean to lie. She was alone. No name. No one claimed her. I thought it would be easier if she just started over. If I gave her a life without pain. You gave her a life without a mother, Eleanor said, her voice breaking. You gave her silence instead of truth. I didn't think she would ever remember, he whispered. Rose took a step back. But I did, and I want to know who I was, who I am. I want to remember all of it, even the pain. Daniel sat back down, his shoulders sinking under the weight of something deeper than guilt. Maybe sorrow, maybe love twisted into something it was never meant to be. Eleanor and Rose left the chapel together. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of salt and sand and something older, something familiar. They walked to the beach, just as the stars began to appear overhead. The moon rose slow and golden over the ocean, casting a path of light across the water. Rose stopped and turned to Eleanor. Do you remember the lullaby? Eleanor smiled through her tears. Always. She began to sing softly, her voice thin and wavering but filled with something stronger than melody. Rose joined in, and for the first time in almost 30 years, their voices braided together. From the dunes behind them, Jane appeared, walking toward them with something in her hand. It was a drawing, another one, but this one was different. It showed all three of them, Eleanor, Rose, and a third figure, Abigail, not as a child but as she would be now, grown, red curls like fire, holding a rabbit. She's still here, Jane said, in us, around us, in every word we speak, every memory we touch. Eleanor nodded. She was never gone, just waiting. They stood in silence, looking out over the ocean. And then Eleanor saw her. Far down the beach, a woman walking slowly, barefoot, a red scarf fluttering in the wind. Her hair was red, her hands bare. She turned once, just enough for Eleanor to see her face. And it was Lily, grown, whole, alive. Rose, Eleanor whispered. Rose turned and saw herself. The woman on the beach smiled, and then was gone, but the scarf remained, drifting toward them on the wind. Eleanor caught it in her hands, her heart pounding. It was warm, and stitched inside were the words, "Come back when you're ready." The ocean whispered, the stars shimmered, and the past at last became whole.